Hello guys, and thank you for watching and welcome to another piece of content from Kamai Media.
Welcome to another sweet episode
Sweet
of
episode.
Life with Kamai Media.
Yeah,
According to Kamai Media.
according to Kamai, that's a better way to put it. One of the topics that I want to address is there are very different genres, the multiplayer and single player games, where. For example, the single-player games, you have a story, or let's just say an environment, because not every single-player game has a story, and the player has to make some decisions. In multiplayer games, it's not like that. As we have
you still have to make decisions.
Yeah, you still have to make decisions.
So a multiplayer game is like a distilled version. Like if you have the concept of a game, the multiplayer game is the most distilled version of a game, where you just have you and your opponent and the game rules. So it's kind of like you're not playing against the game. You're using the game to play against your opponent. Yeah. And the enjoyment from multiplayer games comes from it's a lot of the enjoyment from multiplayer games is meta enjoyment. Like yes, you do enjoy killing your arch nemesis in a multiplayer game, but you enjoy the ribbing and you remember that time I killed you 20 times, you killed me. You enjoy that much more. So it's more of a meta level of a game.
For example, you make decisions all the time in single player games. I really love games that actually make you experience the consequences of your decisions. For example, if you die, you're dead, and that's it. There is a game called Darkest Dungeon, which I love. The English language in that game is particularly good. Mm-hmm. You have some characters, and you put them in some dungeons, whatever. When some of them dies, it's permadeath. You need to make smart decisions. Some other games take that to a bit extreme. Well, it's not to an extreme, but it's a very hard game, like Dark Souls. You have like checkpoints and saves, and you can just die several times. Another game that has a certain mechanic that will let you experience what you decided to do is the Outward, which basically saves all the time. And if you pick this weapon, you have that weapon, and there's no going back. For example, if they give you a decision to make.
I think RPGs right now they're going like you mentioned Dark Souls. They're going really into a very extreme area of kind of having very severe consequences for making these choices that are not very wise in the context of the game. Yes. Like you mentioned permadeath and stuff. I don't think there's much more you can do about that. I mean, you either make permadeath and you make the guy lose everything, and you make him kind of have to work again from the beginning.
That's a very extreme way of taking things to that level.
But I think some games do it as well. So I think there we have the edges of the spectrum, where you have games that you die, and there's the punishment may be that you replay the last couple of minutes of single player games. Action games usually are like that. You die, you replay a small portion, and that's basically your punishment. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have games like Dead Souls, where you basically, when you die, you die. Or any kind of those games in which death is very, very severe. So basically, here you have no consequences for bad decisions. Here you have the ultimate consequence. So you have to basically replay the game to get to that situation again. In between, we don't have a lot, because there is really, if you think about it, game developers don't have a lot of tools at their disposal in terms of how they can punish the player. And when I say punish the player, it usually means they designed the game to be a certain way, and you're not playing it that way, so you have to be punished. I don't mean that kind of punishment. I mean encouraging the player
to try different
things.
A different approach. And,
like for example, I always use this example from Far Cry, where we've created encounters in which it was possible to approach them from different directions and with different playing styles, and it was really hard to explain to players that this is a possibility, because players were really hardwired by single player games at the time to just
go in and start killing people.
go in and then kill a guy and then quick save, and kill a guy and then quick save, and then just basically slowly progress the story forward. And I remember we had a lot of discussions, a lot of arguments about how we make the player go, because we also had an AI that was quite challenging at the time. They were flanking you, they were kind of creating situations. So we actually made it so that the AI was a little bit more difficult for the time. And when you attacked for example, a particular encounter, they would flank you and they would do all kinds of. We actually had we looked it up from military manuals. We had SWAT tactics implemented for the mercenary AI.
That's actually, what year was this?
This was, I think the game came out in 2004.
2004. Wow.
Yes. And as a result, you would have a situation where like a player that was coming from, the state of the art at those times, which was like your Call of Duties or your Medal of Honor games, which were basically just a tunnel. You just keep progressing forward and forward. They expected to just get to the encounter, Rambo in, and then just basically kill everyone. And then they would expect to kill an enemy and then save, kill an enemy and then save. And if we allowed them to do that, basically they would miss the whole concept of you are able to do this differently. So it was a big decision. We had a lot of meetings and we basically shipped the original Far Cry without quick save. We only had checkpoints, and some of them, admittedly, they were placed really poorly. I mean, when you make, I think there was, I might be wrong, maybe there's 12 levels, and this is not your normal corridor level. These were huge levels, and because you could take different paths, the designers had to really set up the checkpoints so that if you take this path, then you're brought back to a checkpoint that's not very far from that point. And some designers did that well, some designers didn't do it that well. It was a game that we spent a lot of time developing. There's a lot of crunch. So some checkpoints were not in their ideal position. And hopefully we put little hints and little, kind of pathways to the side of the hill to kind of encourage you to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't go guns blazing.
Let's see what's there.
Yeah, we had stuff like, you had a hut, and the back door of the hut, which is facing you, which faces away from the little encampment, is open. It's kind of a way to invite you to say, why don't you come? And you go in, and there is a very good weapon there. It's like we put these little cookies around so that if the players started to do different things, or you just grab the boat and, go on the opposite side of the encounter.
Basically, get away from the hard-coded mindset that they had.
That you just have to move forward. Yeah. Because players were basically trained to, hey, you spawn here, and then you just move forward. And whatever comes in your way, you just have to try enough times, and you will kill him. And we spent a lot of time creating the environment, the AI, the game rules of Far Cry to make it more challenging to do something like that. And then we gave you a lot of different options. Because once you feel the kind of the freedom of being able to choose different things, it's very eye-opening for players. Us as game developers are not doing enough to allow the player not just spatial choice, do I go this way, like I come to a corridor, I go here or here.
Left or right.
So I mean, I think we do have a lot of that. We have games. Games have opened up incredibly. I talked about Assassin's Creed. It's a huge world. The GTA games. All the Rockstar games.
There are a lot of games.
All the RPG games that you've mentioned. They're huge open worlds. In the most open world game right now, you have. Do you want to do the story missions, which is this sequence, or these 5 sequence, or do you want side missions?
Side missions.
So they're basically, it's like a beads. The story is like a beaded necklace that you kind of pick the beads up. If you want the story, if you want the kind of the world immersion, then it's wander around and do kind of odd jobs that you do. Yeah. So what we are trying to do in our game is to kind of go the opposite direction. We don't have a lot of space in the game, and that's deliberately because when you have a lot of space and you want to have the density of story points inside that space be very dense, then the more space you have, the more story you have to create. It was a very early and natural decision for us to bring the place
smaller,
physical space. Compress the physical space, so that then you can have the kind of the
story density,
the width of story space basically, and which basically means you have a smaller space, but the amount of things that can happen in that space increases. So, and we the setting we have right now is a space station, but we played with different settings. For example, I don't know if you're aware of this. Some of the early drafts of the game had the characters be on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. We went through a phase where we were really influenced by The Thing, the movie, and they were basically scientists in a remote Arctic station, And then
I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, we went through a phase where it was like a BioShock-like dome under the water. So we were looking for spaces that
they're a bit isolated in smaller spaces,
and they are really compressed spaces. Yes. Because the principal kind of innovation was to allow the player depth in the story space, and this is where we kind of go back to the choice of the player and how you punish the player
and the consequences.
So
what mechanic does Sonder take from all of these variations, like checkpoints, constantly saving, never saving, permadeath, whatever? What's closest to Sonder of those? What would you say?
What we do is there's no reason to save in our game because we save all the time, and that's basically how we implement the rewind feature. So as you play the game records everything. And then at any point in time, you can stop and rewind like a VCR backward and forward. And because we record the simulation data, then we can allow you to resume from any previous point. We minimized the punishment.
The punishment
for the player, because if you do some kind of choices and you end up in a situation that you don't like, you can just rewind. 1, 3, 5, 10, 15 seconds, however much you think you need to rewind to actually try something else. We did this on purpose because we don't want the player to feel like if he goes if he ends up in a wrong place in the story, if he ends up going into the wrong direction, we want to encourage them to try to try different things, and we want to make the cost of trying something different very small. If you just play the game, if you just listen to the game, you will end up in a pretty bad situation. So we're kind of playing off the thing where players expect the game to tell them, this is what you should be doing right now, and they kind of if they want to go back to the story, they just basically their instinct is to just listen to what the game is telling them. But for our case, if you listen to what the game is telling you, then it will just give you the most obvious route through the story. The cost of trying branches is as minimal as possible. And we did that by saving the entire game state all the time. An interesting, for example, mechanic, I don't know if we've mentioned this before, is we see some players explore the space using time as a resource. And I'll tell you how. What the instinct of the players is to basically start walking around the rooms and explore different parts of the rooms. But what happens is if you spend too much time in a room, inevitably time runs out,
Yeah.
And instead of them restarting the game, what they do is they spend a couple of minutes exploring a room. Then they stop, they rewind the time, and they use the same 2 minutes to explore a different room.
Mm-hmm.
In game time, they've reused the same 2 minutes to explore all rooms, and they pick up all the information from those rooms into their own mind, because the game doesn't, for the characters in the game, time rewinds. They don't know anything more than they did.
Of course,
but you as the player know. And then once you rewind, the last time after you've looked at all the rooms and you've read the computer readouts, you've tried to interact with items, when you rewind for the last time, you kind of build another plan and say, okay, now I'm going to do this. I can grab this from this room. I can take it to this room. I can log into this computer. I can turn this off. I can turn this on. Yeah, and what happens is they realize they don't just have that time. They have all the time in the world, because at any point in time they can go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And what's interesting is that if you know where to look and where to go and what to do, you can rewind from the very first second in the game, and you can just basically take the character and take him directly to that place. So you don't have to do any of the other things that you had to do to understand that. You can just beeline for that exact thing, for the object of your plan, and then get the benefit. Of course, there is the thing here where, for example, if the character doesn't know that he needs a certain item, or he doesn't know that he needs to interact with some computer, you have to kind of tell the character first. For example, in an early prototype of the game, which I think we'll see in one of the later videos, in an early prototype of the game, we had this thing where the situation was, meteor hits the ship, and once you realize that that's what's happening, when you get to the end, you see, oh, look, there's a giant meteor, it hit me, and I died. So you restart now, and now you go, oh, I know there's a meteor coming, but the character that you're controlling, he just woke up. He has no idea that there's a meteor coming. So what you need to do is you need to bring him to a computer, to the radar, for example. We had a radar back then. You have to bring them to the radar. You have to make them look at the radar and basically make them see the meteor coming, 10 minutes in advance, so that they can
react.
So they can say, oh my God, there's a meteor coming, and then, an information that in the previous playthrough you had at the very end of the playthrough, now you have at the very beginning of the playthrough, and now armed with that information which you gave to the player, he can
take action.
He can take action. Other things open up for him, So that's basically, a lot of the feedback we've had about the game since it's been in early access and people have played it, is that when you start the game, you as the player don't know anything about what's going on, because we don't have a long introductory cutscenes. We don't tell you what the characters are and stuff like that. You will know much less about the situation in the game than the characters do. So it kind of puts you in a very disadvantaged position. But once you've done a few playthroughs, there is a very interesting thing that only happens in our game, where the roles reverse. You start knowing much more about what's going to happen, and the character knows much less. And I think that's one of the major aha moments for players in our. If we bring the players of our game to that moment, I think they will understand how to play games like these. And it's all combined with the ability to understand time as a resource, rather than something that either you have so much and then you're out of it. So if he has to go all the way to the beginning, And
Yeah,
it's way
it's
too
a
much punishment.
painstaking path to take. Even if you know what to do, just
Exactly.
doing everything
It's
over
it's
and
like
over
that
again.
movie Bandersnatch on
Yeah,
Netflix.
the Bandersnatch
You know, it's a movie that allows you to make interactive
Yeah,
choices.
but it's in several places in the
Yes,
in time.
if you make a choice and you go, oh, I want to try something else, you really you have to rewatch the same kind of preparatory video clip that
Yeah,
brings you to the decision.
too far.
And I think that was one of the major flaws in Bandersnatch is that if you try to explore the kind of the tree structure that they have for the story, then you will face a lot of repetition that you can't skip. That it starts to play and you go, I've seen this a million times. You don't have to remind me. And I think they had some technological limitations that
Probably,
that didn't allow them to make certain shortcuts, and maybe they could have made a fast forward mode, and then if you made a choice, you could only return to the most recent choice point. You couldn't like navigate the choice points in the back end. And I think that's what soured the experience. I love the effort. The idea is that people are thinking about this. They are thinking about participation of the protagonist in the outcome of the story. And because in games you have the interactability, you have freedom of movement with your character, it's a very natural medium where such an exploration would happen.
I think that's very close to the way I'd say novels are made. But I've seen the whole branching of the story, and I think that's the most like original way to describe what we're trying to do with Sonder. Basically, let the player explore every single branch that they can.
Even if you're writing a linear narrative, if that narrative is going to be rich and engaging, you have to understand the motivations and the storylines and the branches that happen away from the main narrative that you're going through. I mean, at the end, you will just present the main narrative to the reader
but the story
or the movie viewer. But in developing that, you would have developed all these other branches, and those branches give richness and depth to the characters and richness and depth to situations. The thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to provide that a way for people that write stories to embed that information somehow in the medium, and then allow the players to experience that as well.
I'd say that those side like branches of the story, they sometimes give a very very important information, and I would say the utmost motivation for the person to do something. For example,
all that richness of the story is already there when people are creating for traditional mediums like books and movies. Our hope is that we will get to a situation where it's easy for them to create this rich backstory and this rich story space.
Yes.
This rich story space, they can basically translate it as it is into the form of a game. And then, let the player loose, not in the space of the game, but in the space of the story. Yeah. So once we have a good showcase with our game, Sonder, we can then open up maybe the tool sets and stuff and have more people kind of look at it. And we're trying that right now. We're trying to open up our tools to more different people and have them try to do something in the tools and maybe try to achieve something that we maybe didn't think about. And a big part of our technology and our tool set is making it easy for content creators, for narrative designers to kind of get a grip and control the entire narrative with all its branches.
So the last thing that I wanted to say is that if you have an idea or a request for us to explain some things about the game or tools, I don't know if that being the art department, or if you want to know I don't know what tools are made or what tools are used to make this game, feel free to contact us on any social media or in the comments on our videos. So we will be happy to provide the answers that you seek.
And it's also for us. It's really hard to explain to people shortly what this game is and how it's different. And this is one of the reasons why we're doing these series of videos, just to be able to have the space to really explain the idea and the vision behind the game. Everyone says, I'm making a non-linear game. Everyone says, the decisions that you make in our game affect the outcome, but not a lot of people deliver on that. So if we just say, hey, you make your own decisions, your choices matter, I don't know how much that means to people, and I think just because the way we implement this is a very novel way of implementing this, it's really hard to explain to people. Like we don't have a very good elevator pitch. Mm-hmm. So and right now I'm in a position to say that it doesn't exist. A good elevator pitch for this idea doesn't exist, because it is so different from many different aspects. So that's why we're trying to make these series of videos to kind of go in depth in separate aspects of it, so that people can have a good idea about how this game is different and how we arrived at that kind of difference and uniqueness for the game. So yeah, cool.
Thank you for the talk, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.